was once a wise philosopher who said, things are not always what they seem. The first appearance deceives many, and the intelligence of a few perceives what has been carefully hidden. And I believe that man was exactly right. He kind of used some confusing words to what he said, but what he is saying is that sometimes there are things that we see and we perceive them as one way. We think we have it figured out. And then later down the line, it comes to find out we were wrong. And things weren't really how they were the first time we thought about them. Now, sometimes this is because of trickery, kind of like whenever a magician like Riley comes up and blows your mind by doing something of the impossible and tries to make it seem possible, right? Magicians are cool. I love magicians. Macy, you got a cool guy there, okay? Hang on to him. Just kidding. No, he really is cool. So sometimes it's because of trickery that things aren't what they always seem. But sometimes the problem is that people are just liars. Did you know that? People are liars. They will flat out lie to you. It's kind of like what that weatherman did the other week ago. Did you guys see that weather report during Hurricane Florence? Did you see that video? Jared, can you show us that video?
Picking it up here in Wilmington, North Carolina, right at the Intracoastal, and we're in one of these bands. This is about as nasty as it's been. We had some bands like this last night, and then the eye wall this morning, we were not on TV. It was the dark and raucous night at the hotel, and this wind gusting again over 60 miles an hour. Things blowing by, pieces of limbs. This is what we're seeing a lot of. Shingles coming off.
Shingle?
You see what happens when you throw it off. It
up and down, back
off
to the ground, just like that. See, the wind is just so crazy, and he is just really trying to stand up there on that grass, and in the background, there's people walking by with no problem. 60-mile wind. These gusts are just crazy. But somehow he is standing there back in the background just walking around. And then he picks up the shingle, throws it up, and it falls right back down to the ground. It's a crazy projectile, right? People are lying. I mean, even the Weather Channel fits into the category of fake news. Can you believe that? I mean, what's next? The Hallmark Channel or something? I mean, it just continues to get worse and worse. You can't trust anything you see now. And the reason is because things aren't always what they seem. And this isn't just true in our lives today, but it was true in the lives of people thousands and thousands of years ago. And we find proof of that in the Bible through several different stories, one of which is found in the 23rd chapter of the Gospel of Luke. And here in the 23rd chapter of Luke, we find Luke's account of the crucifixion of Jesus. And from this story today, I believe that we can see three different things that can prove to us things aren't always what they seem. So I want to go through three parts of this story. The first one that we find coming to the crucifixion of Jesus is, number one, the cross. Verse 33 sets the stage for us. It says, "And when they had come to the place called Calvary, there they crucified him, and the criminals, one on the right hand and the other on the left." Now, guys, to have a crucifixion, you must first have a cross, right? Very important part. And in these days, crosses were numerous. There were plenty to go around. They were everywhere. And where today almost any death sentence is carried out is through lethal injection, back in these days, most of these death sentences were carried out by crucifixion. And we find when we study about crucifixion that it was not invented by the Romans. A lot of people think that it was because they used it so often. It wasn't invented by them, but yes, they really did use it a lot. And they used it because it served a couple of purposes for them. Number one, it was the most horrible, painful, torturous, and humiliating form of execution possible. Which meant, number one, that if someone was crucified on a cross, they were going to pay the ultimate sacrifice for the sins that they had committed. For the crimes that they committed, these people were really going to pay. But the second reason that they used crosses so often was because the crosses stood as an example to all of the other people around. They used this form of torture because if you saw someone up on a cross, you knew that the same thing was going to happen to you if you were to break the rules. And so the Romans used these crosses as examples of what could happen. And this example was ingrained into the minds of the people. And because of that, to see a cross in that day was not a good thing. People did not like seeing crosses. You know, today it's completely different, right? There's crosses everywhere. There's crosses probably on some of your jewelry that you're wearing, whether a ring or maybe a necklace. Even here at Randall, it's on our school flag, the cross. Our churches are loaded down with crosses. They're everywhere. And I began to think, if there was a person who had physically seen a person be crucified on a cross, if that person were to walk into any of our churches today, they would run out screaming. They would be scared to death of what they had seen. Because things aren't always what they seem. You see, back in this day, this cross stood as a torture device to keep people walking the straight line. But then today, it stands for us as the most widely recognized symbol of Christianity all over the world. And things really aren't as they seem. But it doesn't stop there, because in this story, we also move on, not just to the crosses, but the people hanging on the crosses. And we find there, number two criminals. And this scene here in Luke 23 is not complete if we just turn our attention to the crosses that littered that hill. Because there hanging on those crosses were bodies of people just like you and me. And in particular, as I just read to you, there were two criminals who were hung there on either side of Jesus. And in verses 39 through 43, we can read of the discourse that took place between those three crosses. Let me read to you here, starting in verse 39. It says, "Then one of the criminals who were hanged blasphemed him, saying, 'If you are the Christ, save yourself and us.' But the other answering rebuked him, saying, 'Do you not even fear God, seeing you are under the same condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we receive the due rewards of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong.' Then he said to Jesus, 'Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom.' And Jesus said to him, 'Assuredly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise.'" I read that and I began to think that's kind of an interesting conversation to take place while you're hung on a cross, isn't it? And then I began thinking, the conversation that just took place, the one we just read, it involves some of the last words that these people would ever say. I mean, these people, it was the end of the line for them. And there was nothing that they could do about it. And I also began to think, it's probable that these criminals had heard of Jesus before. I mean, really, Jesus was all the rave during this day. His name and his story were spreading like wildfire. Everyone knew about this Jesus man. Yet when the first criminal began asking Jesus to save them from this horrific event, it was not because he thought that Jesus would do it. In fact, we find that he didn't even believe that Jesus could do it. This man did not believe that Jesus was the King of the Jews, as the sign above him indicated. But the same is not true of the second offender, the one hanging on the other side of Jesus. And this is the criminal that I want us to look at today. Because by the words with which this criminal responded, it is clear that he had definitely heard of Jesus before. Because we see here that this man realized that both he and the other criminal were dying because of just causes. Why? Because they were sinners. They had committed crimes. But then Jesus had not done anything to deserve the treatment that he was receiving. He was sinless. The second criminal takes it a step further. He does the opposite of what the first criminal had done, because not only did he believe that Jesus could save him, but he also believed that Jesus would save him. Not from their current situation. He wasn't expecting for Jesus to climb down off of his cross and come and pull him off of his cross. No. But he knew that Jesus could save him from the eternity that was awaiting them. And so he goes on to say to Jesus something that I am sure no one else had said to Jesus that day. In verse 42, this criminal says to Jesus, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Again, kind of an interesting thing to say there on a cross. But let me remind you, he was counting down the final moments of his life. He knew that there was no turning back now. He knew that he was about to die. And all of a sudden, his mind wasn't focused on the different pleasures that he used to indulge in. He wasn't focused on those past crimes that he had committed, but instead, he was focused on more important things. Things like where he was about to spend eternity. And the best news for him are the words that he heard Jesus say in verse 43. Jesus said to him, "Assuredly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." Yep, he had made some dumb choices up to this point. You bet he was cutting his time close. But because of his faith in Christ, this man who was being executed for his sins now had those sins forgiven by the only man who could forgive those sins in the first place. It was the man hanging on the cross beside him. There in the middle. That man who was and is the Savior of the world. And what I want us to see this morning is that what looked like the end was really only the beginning. I mean, make it clear to you this morning. This man was about to die and go to hell. The door of opportunity was about to close. And then he realized what he needed more than anything else in the world. And that was a way to be saved. And at the last second, he had a change of course and actually went to heaven. In fact, we read here in the scripture that that day he went into paradise. And so take away with you today that things are not always what they seem. And why? Why can we say that is the case today? Well, it's because of point number 3, the Christ. Because this is where the story takes an interesting turn. And once again, we see that things are not always what they seem. Because we read here at the end of this story, starting in verse 44, that now it was about the 6th hour. And there was darkness over earth until the 9th hour. Then the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was torn in two. And when Jesus had cried out with a loud voice, he said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Having said this, he breathed his last. So when the centurion saw what had happened, he glorified God, saying, "Certainly this was a righteous man." And the whole crowd who came together to that sight, seeing what had been done, beat their breast and returned. But all of his acquaintances and the women who followed him from Galilee stood at a distance watching these things. Did you catch that? Pretty exciting time there. It was about noon and all of a sudden the sky turns dark. And I'm not just saying it was partly cloudy, but I'm saying you look up and you see that the whole sky is pitch black. And Jesus cries out his final words, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And at that moment he breathed his last breath. He died. He was gone. And at that moment, everything goes crazy. In Matthew's Gospel, chapter 27, we read another account of this event. And there we find that when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. Oh boy. You see, everyone there at the foot of the cross, I'm telling you what, they knew that something supernatural was going down. Because all of a sudden, there was this major earthquake, something like they had never seen before. The rocks were literally splitting in half. They look and they see tombs bursting open and dead bodies walking out and into the cities. They see this veil, this curtain that was found there in the temple that was shielding God's eyes from the sin of the world. Because of the ultimate sacrifice that Jesus allowed himself to become, it was torn. And not partially, but it says all the way from the top to the bottom. I'm telling you what, this was a major deal because this curtain was 60 feet high, 30 feet wide, and 4 inches thick. And it was destroyed instantaneously at the time that the final physical sacrifice was slain. There at the cross, the guard who's in charge of all of this going on, he yells out, "Certainly this was a righteous man." In other words, boys, we just messed up. We just killed an innocent man. Too late now. You think about it. Just hours earlier, these Roman soldiers had beat him, mocked him, tore out his beard, spit in his face, put a crown of thorns on his head. They were calling him sarcastically the King of the Jews, and they were taunting him to save himself from the cross. And all of a sudden they realize, we made a mistake. Things aren't always the way they seem. The whole day, for years in fact, this Jesus man appeared to be just another man. He looked like a man. He felt like a man. He smelled like a man. But turns out, the man that was in their custody was truly the Son of God. He was born 30 plus years ago. He had lived his whole life. He was preaching and teaching for years. And by now you would think that these people would have understood that there was something different about this sinless man. But no. Because of their blinded eyes, most of them remained unaffected by who he was. In fact, the saddest part about this whole story, at least to me, is to see the reaction of those people there at the cross. Because we read here that when all of this happened, when all of this took place, they beat their chest and they ran away. They left that scene completely unaffected. The clearest expression and description of who Jesus really was, the way that they could know that Jesus was really the Son of God, just took place. And what was their response? They ran away. But not everyone ran away. Because we find in verse 49 that all of his acquaintances and the women who followed him from Galilee stood at a distance watching these things. You say, why didn't they run away? Who was that was staying there at the cross? Well, I'll tell you who it was. It was the people who had seen Jesus before. It was the people who actually knew him. And so when they saw Jesus on the cross, really what happened to them was not fear, but really their faith had been strengthened from the events of this day. Because once again, Jesus had proved to them who he really was. Those people got it. And those people stayed. And they watched what happened. And they remembered what the cross was all about. But really, here's what we can take away. To the people who were present that day, to the angry mob, to the Roman soldiers, to the family of Jesus, even to the criminals who were on each side of Jesus, I'm telling you what, this started out like any other crucifixion. They happened frequently. They were commonplace. People were used to seeing these things. And really, no one knew at that time what this would mean for the history of the world. It must have meant something. Because here, thousands of years later, we're looking at this same story. And today we can look back and we can see that it was a major turning point for all of history. And it was because of one reason. Jesus was not just another man. He did look like a man, felt like a man, smelled like a man. He wasn't just another man. And things are not always what they seem. So why am I telling us the story today? I mean, it's not even close to Easter yet, right? So I should be waiting for a few more months before I start preaching this. Well, probably. And maybe I'll do that too. I don't know. But I don't think it hurts for us to be reminded that things aren't always what they seem. You say, why does that matter? Because from this thought that things aren't always what they seem, I believe we can find 3 points of application from the story. And I'm going to give them to you quick. But I hope that they are going to resonate within us. The first thing is that, number one, bad things can turn into good things. I mean, we look around in our lives and all the time we can find something bad, can't we? There are going to be bad things surrounding us, and they come in tighter and tighter all the time. But to be honest, sometimes these bad things are brought on by ourselves, aren't they? But then on the flip side, there are bad things in our life and bad things that happen to us that we have no control over. We didn't do anything necessarily to bring that about. And you know what? As much as we hate to see different bad things happen to us in our life, the truth is that sometimes those bad things can end up leading to good things. Whether it be disease or death or addiction or financial trouble or academic trouble or even relationship trouble. Whatever the bad situation is that you're facing in your life, listen, you have the choice of how you're going to handle that situation. And really, sometimes it takes some kind of bad situation in order to give us a wake-up call that we have so desperately been needing. And so, point of application, when you get the wake-up call, hopefully you can realize that you need to make some changes in your life. And if you do, if you take whatever bad thing it is that's happening in your life and it forces you to get back on the right track, all of a sudden that bad thing turns into a good thing. And really, bad things, as much as we hate for them to happen to us, and as hurtful as they are, they can also be helpful. And so, number one, bad things can turn into good things. Number two, the end can really be the beginning. And I really wanted to focus on this very quickly because I believe it resonates inside of a group of college students. And here's why. Because college is a really interesting time. Because it's very chock full of transitions. Because right now in this room, there are sitting some freshmen who have just graduated high school. And so all of a sudden, you're in a new stage of life, right? And I bet, for those of you who are freshmen, you probably just had to spend a lot of time doing some deep thinking about life. You had to answer questions like, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? Who do you want to be? And you had to answer those questions because you know what? You can't stay in high school anymore. You're graduated. That part is finished. But you know what? That end is really only the beginning of the rest of your life. And it's not just that way for freshmen, but also seniors. Mitch told you I graduated here last year. I was a senior, had to graduate. I know exactly what it feels like. You get to senior year, and there's some of you here right now, and you want to quit. And sometimes it's because college is really hard, and you're tired of writing papers, all this stuff, tired of reading, and you want to quit. But you know what? I think really senior year is harder than anything, not because it's so hard, but because of a little thing called the fear of the unknown. Because you know in your mind, you're coming to a major end. High school was one thing. College is another because for a lot of seniors, you're out of school the rest of your life. And so you begin asking questions to yourself, what is on the other side of school? You have to start thinking, do I really have to fully become an adult? You ask, what job am I going to take? Is there going to be a job? All kinds of questions like that. And they're great questions to ask for any of us to ask. But here's what I want to say. Don't let those questions be those that stop your progress, but instead let them be questions that once answered can springboard you into the rest of your life. Because we have to realize at some point that the end may really be the beginning. Bad things can turn into good things. The end can really be the beginning. But point number 3, and I'm done. Jesus is not just a man, but he is the Son of God. And sometimes I think that we know that's a part that we can understand. We're not probably most of us asking who Jesus is. We've either heard it or maybe we've went to church sometime in our life and we know who Jesus is. Here's the problem that I think we struggle with more than anything. Not who Jesus is, but we don't acknowledge who he is. You see, we don't always treat Jesus in the way that he deserves. We do when we're needing something in our life, but then once that need is fulfilled or once things begin going smooth in our life again, it's as if Jesus just slips back into the background. He becomes just another member of the crowd again, and we treat him just like another person. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. But pretty much most of the time, I believe we get caught in treating Jesus indifferently. Like he doesn't matter. He's just there. And he's waiting for us to call and bring him to our need. Jesus is not just a man. And we can see here in this scripture a very perfect picture of what happens. This first criminal really didn't know who Jesus was. He didn't think that Jesus could or would save him. The second criminal was not the same. He believed that both Jesus could and would save him. This man had put his faith in Christ. And so the question comes up to us today. Is Jesus just someone that we know about, or is he something more? Let me ask you today, what do you believe that Jesus can do for you? If he really isn't just a man, he probably has the power of God like we say he does, then what can he do for you? What bad situation is it in your life that he can help you with? But then to take it another step further, what do you believe Jesus will do for you? Sometimes we know who he is. We have this faith that he can do these things. We don't have the faith that he will. We treat him just like another man, but Jesus is not just another man. Here at the cross, Jesus took something bad and he made it into good. He turned the end into a beginning. And he did it all because he loved that criminal. A criminal of all people. And I'm here to tell you today that he loves you too. And he will do the same. And so things aren't always what they seem. So my encouragement to us today, all of us, is to take a look at our life. Because if things really aren't the way that they seem, then maybe we should take a look at our lives and make sure things are the way that we think they are. You know what I'm saying? If we think things are one way, let's look at it again and make sure it's that way. Especially for those of us who are professing to be Christians. Even the ones who are sleeping right now. The ones who profess to be Christians are to be acting in a certain way, right? And if we're not matching up to what we say we are, things aren't really the way they seem. But here's what I want to leave with you today. That Jesus, when he is involved in your situation, whatever it is, things still have a capability of changing. Because things aren't always what they seem. So for those of us who are Christians, we need to take another look. And even for those of us who may not be Christians today, maybe you've never made a commitment with Christ, you need to take another look too. I'll give you this. If Jesus was just a man who lived 2,000 years ago, he probably doesn't have much to offer you today. Somebody who lived 2,000 years ago and died and is gone, they're going to fade away. But on the flip side, if Jesus really isn't just a man, and maybe he is who everyone has said he is for so long, maybe you do need to take another look before completely making up your mind. Will you pray with me? Father, I love you, and I'm so thankful for your love for us. Lord, thank you for allowing us to come into this space today to sing praises to your name and to take a look at your holy word. Father, would you remind us today that you're in the business of changing lives? Lord, that things aren't always the way they seem. Lord, that you can take something that is bad and you can turn it into good if only we will be willing. That even when we come to the end of some point in our life, it's only the beginning of something else. And Lord, help us to realize today fully that you are not just a man, but that you are the Son of God. And Lord, help us to take this realization, apply it to our lives, and live differently because of it. And Lord, if there is someone in here today who has been questioning who you are, Lord, I pray that they would not give up on trying to find the answers. That they would realize that it's okay to question as long as they're still looking for those answers. And Lord, I pray that they would find the answers that they are looking for. We ask all this in your precious and holy name. Amen.